Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
From the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
Freedom is the new F word, people.
and want to feel less alone along the way,
We got you. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them.
Hi, Janelle. Andrea, how you doing?
Peachy keen, jelly bean. It's a piece of cake, life. Especially boundaries. They're my favorite thing.
Wow, so good. Freedom. There's freedom and boundaries.
There's freedom in boundaries.
One of my favorite expressions.
I haven't heard that one. What
Really?
a nice paradox. Yeah, there's freedom in boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Freedom is the new F word.
Mm-hmm.
Way to weave that in. Yeah, so Janelle's just coaching me on the fact that when people come into my life who I don't want, who I'm like, ooh, ugh, I don't like that energy. Instead of judging and sitting in all this ickiness and complaining and being annoyed about it, I can say, oh, okay. They're here to teach me about boundaries. Just a little bit of sarcasm there.
Just a little bit, but I could see your face.
But it's true. I believe it. They do teach us about boundaries. And what comes up for me when I talk about boundaries is, oh, if I set a boundary, then I'm going to disappoint someone.
Mm-hmm.
Which just points back to people pleasing, which just points back to coming back to myself and knowing it's okay to decide what I want in the moment.
I just came back from a 5-day workshop on this by Betty Martin. And in boundaries or limits, as she refers to them, is like a cornerstone of how do we know what we want, and then how do we ask for it? There's a lot of what this workshop's about. And this particular podcast, which is about a safer sex conversation, is also about asking for what we want.
Absolutely. And I would say safer sex conversation just feels like it's so narrow. This sex is one
Component. This is not just a conversation about sex. There's a whole arc to it. And really this conversation of RBDSM is you can have before you're intimate, period, with anyone, before you're in a relationship. It doesn't even, like, intimacy can be defined in different ways. It doesn't have to involve sex.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the beauty of this conversation is also helping you determine whether you want to progress further in the intimacy or in the sexual activity. So having this conversation is, and why it was so freeing for me when I learned it, was that instead of having to guess what the other person was thinking about me or me about them, we cleared up a whole lot of things right in the beginning and then got to make a decision from an informed perspective about how we wanted to progress with the relationship or the hour-long intimacy or whatever it was.
However you're interacting.
Yes.
So let's define what these mean right now so people know what the hell we're talking about. So it's relationship, boundaries, desires, sexual health, and STIs, meaning. So again, relationships, boundaries, desires, sexual health, and STIs, and meaning.
Yeah. And then the A that I'm adding to the end of it is aftercare. So for me, when I learned about this in my mid-40s, and I learned about this from ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. I know we are quoting, because her language is really great, Tracy Nojek, which is a Gnojek, who's a Tantra educator. And you can look it up and get more information. When I learned about it, right, I'm in a poly relationship. I was playing with other people. And this conversation to have, this just became the most important part of the play. Like, it became part of the play. It was part of the experience for me. It wasn't like, oh, it took anything away. It actually was beyond my wildest imagination. It enhanced the pleasure of the experience.
I totally believe you. And I think that's completely true. I'm just trying to make sure that it's something that people can use. I love it. I want to do an episode on it. But I'm still a little bit like, can this be something that people sit down and talk about as they're starting to make out? You know?
So I'm going to say yes. We did teach it to our stepson, and he was like, this is the best thing ever. And he brought up a version of it. So fears, desires, and boundaries is a shortened version of this. He brought that up as a litmus test on every first date. Someone wasn't willing to have the conversation. He's like, hey, I've got this like framework of how to get to know each other better. Are you open to it? And they would have this conversation. And that helped him know if he wanted to have a second date.
Okay. So that example sounds great, but that's very different than what we said 5 minutes ago, or like before you're intimate with someone, right? And I think it's just about nuance here, because I realize you're saying this is just a way to get to know someone. That is one way to frame it, which is great. Love it. But I think when I was introduced to it, it was more like, okay, we're going to have sex. We better have this conversation first. I think the timing of that is what seemed like that might be hard to accomplish.
This isn't for everyone. This is someone who is actually wanting to be conscious and thoughtful about their intimacy. Right there, I'm like, let's set that tone. It doesn't matter what age you are. You
Agreed.
actually are trying to have more intentionality before you interact. The other piece too is the idea of this conversation for me is once you have it, you get to decide if you're going to have sex. So if you're like, oh, we're going to have sex, now we have to have the conversation. That to me is backwards. It's the idea of, oh, I'm interested in having sex. Let's have this conversation and see where that goes.
I think it's all about the timing, and like, you know, as a way of your stepson getting to know someone on a date. Yeah, that sounds great. That's conversation over a table. Yeah, versus like sort of panic, like falling into like, you know, getting to know someone and then thinking, oh, we might be intimate, and like, oh shit, we better have that RBDSM conversation.
Well, but I'll speak to when I've had it. So like I've been in a couple of different situations, threesomes, foursomes, where I don't know everyone who's there, who's participating. We have established, like, we know each other enough to know that we want, like, there's an interest in playing together. We say, okay, let's plan for Thursday night. And part of Thursday night is we're going to have this conversation, and we'll have the conversation. And then depending on the outcomes of these conversations, then we say, okay, great, we're going to play now. Now we're going to go change our outfits. We're going to do whatever. So it is like right before something happens.
Yeah, this is very different though but this is different than like being kind of out and about, right? Like you're being super intentional. You're getting together with a bunch of people. That makes sense. So you would have it right before.
Yeah. Where I think this would be tough to have, which is maybe your point, is if you're heading out to have a one night stand with a stranger who has no exposure to this framework. Yeah. That feels very difficult, which I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And everyone I'm doing this with either has experience with the framework itself, or I've given a lot of spaciousness to the framework. Like an entire date was this.
Yes. So of course I'm totally for this, and I'm not out looking for a one night stand. I'm thinking more in terms of like talking to a 17-year-old or a 20-year-old who's in college, being a mom. It's just like, oh, how can I weave this in to situations that, you know, she might encounter? And we don't have to answer that right now. Let's continue with we'll talk about that.
Yeah, why don't we come back to it?
But
yeah, why don't we come back to it at the end? Because it feels like to me, as someone who doesn't have a parent, I'm not a parent of a 17-year-old or a 21-year-old or a 25-year-old, but like that these are questions to be aware of that seem useful.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So really, our relationship. What is your current relationship status? Have you been in a relationship? Are you in two relationships? Are you just dating? How long have you been with someone? I mean, we sometimes find ourselves attracted to someone who may be in a relationship already. And so that leads to, you know, what are you looking for from this? Is it a short-term fling? Is it long-term? Is it just tonight? You know, and how can we move forward with clarity?
Okay, so how this podcast is going to be laid out is we're going to go over each of the acronyms, RBDSMA, and then Andrea and I are going to role play what having this conversation looks like. So the first one is relationship. And so that question, that's like relationship status. Are you single? Are you in an open relationship? If you're in a relationship, does that person know that you're in an open relationship or not? What are you looking for in a relationship? Are you single and you're looking for a long-term partner? are you single and super busy with school and in finals and you're just looking for like a fun night out? Are you looking for friends? Maybe you're not even looking for an intimate partner. Are you actually like just looking for friends? Next one, B, boundaries. What are your physical boundaries? And you can be explicit and mature. Like, here's what I'm open to tonight in this moment. And it might be, here's what I'm open to in the future, but I don't know right now. And being really clear about what your body wants. You know, if you're open to having intercourse tonight, or are you just open to making out? Or are you just only open to having the conversation right now? Are some of the examples.
And I think this is what's important to note here is that you have to know what you want. And sometimes we don't know what we want. And one of my favorite lyrics in a song is like, in the heat of the argument, I got tricked into knowing how I felt. Right. And no one really tricked anyone, but it's easy to just respond because you feel like you have to give an answer when you really don't know. And so in these situations, I encourage you to say, you know what? I don't know. And so I guess it's a no for now.
Great.
Yeah.
Great point. And one of the other things that I like to say is one of my boundaries is not allowing anyone to interact with me who's not in a fuck yes. And in that way, you know, you still want to have your physical boundaries there, but you can also say that's the feeling in my system. It's like, you know, I've hit a limit. I'm no longer a fuck yes. That's where I'm stopping. And the other thing too is recognizing that boundaries can change them. Like you can be, I don't know what my boundary is. And then when you hit it, then you can speak up to it. Right? Like that's always an option is to add more boundaries. Yeah.
Change your mind at any time. And I think, or just remember too, when you're answering these questions, it's okay to pause. Like it's okay to pause for like 5 minutes. That's just not really how our society works. And I feel it like I'm okay. You know, I'm just going to breathe into that. Just give me a second. And I do, but I only take 30 seconds because I'm like, well, I better say something. Where I notice, you know, talking with some people, they're just like, no, they'll take 3 or 4 minutes. And that's okay to do that.
Absolutely.
It's a breaking through of your own urgency to answer. So boundaries, we all have different ideas about our sexual encounters. So remember too, that boundaries might apply to physical. They could apply to mental. They could apply to coming to my house, coming to your house. Like boundaries is a big word that encompasses a lot of different aspects.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like a boundary could be like, I have to be home by 11 o'clock. I'm working in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Whatever happens.
Right. A boundary could be, yeah, great, except we're staying or keeping our clothes on. A boundary could be like, we're not going into the bedroom.
D, desires. So what do you desire in this moment? Like, I would like to get to know you better. I would like to have your fingers run through my hair. I desire to feel more connected to you at the end of this experience than I do right now.
Yeah. I want to feel held. I want to feel touched. I want to feel seen. I want to feel recognized. I want to feel heard. Like there's all sorts of different ways that have nothing to do with physical intimacy that you could desire. And so this is really explicitly saying what you want. It's amazing how some people are just not comfortable doing that.
In all honesty, most of us.
Maybe.
Right? I think it's a skill that we have to learn. Some of us learn it, but we're not conditioned, most of us, to ask
for what we want. How did you learn it?
Well, I'm like in the process of learning it right now. I think this has been all part of my experience in this personal growth realm. It just so happens this wheel of consent feels so important to this. But especially when it comes to sexual intimacy, a lot of women have been conditioned to it's not okay to want sex. And then conversely, men are supposed to want sex. And society's conditioning leaves very little room for desires and speaking them from a place of authenticity, right? It can be very, very vulnerable to start sharing what you want. So for a guy to be like, I just want to make out, where the assumption might be that he's supposed to want. And for the girl to, I want you to touch me in this way. What does that mean? How do you know that about yourself? Right? Like there could just be some judgment. Learning to feel inside my body what it is that I want and then speak it has been extraordinarily empowering.
Awesome.
S, sexual health. So this is an opportunity just to recognize that sexuality and sex it's not that it's a high risk behavior, but there are inherent risks to it. And some behaviors are more high risk than others. But that STIs and STDs are something to be aware of. They have this stigma that a lot of us have felt over time, but just that to normalize the experience of getting tested on a regular basis and then knowing how to prevent getting STIs. And then if you have them, how to talk about them. Under this category, you're just have the chance to say the last time you got tested, the last time you had unprotected sex, the last time you had any sort of intimacy. One thing to keep in mind through all of these letters at the end of this conversation, you have the chance to say, oh, I now have new information. Do I want to proceed or not? And so one of the other aspects here in sexual health is pregnancy. That's obviously not an STI or an STD. But if you are of child producing years, then you want to name that. What happens if a pregnancy resulted? What would you do with that?
Right. And pregnancy years, but are you on the pill? Are you protected? Do you have some kind of protection or not?
Or do you have a vasectomy? So,
just like really covering what you're doing to protect yourself
from getting pregnant if you don't want to get pregnant.
Exactly.
And if you do get pregnant, also naming that, right? I mean, that is also part of this conversation of getting to know one another.
Yeah. Important.
And really the key here for the S is that you are wanting to give someone else the choice to make decisions about their own health. If you are someone that has an STI and STD and not sharing it, then you're taking away someone else's choice.
So M stands for meaning. What meaning will each of you place on this sexual experience? Like, what does it mean if you have sex? What does it mean if you kiss? What does it mean if you make out? Will one person feel like it's immediately exclusive while the other person will think nothing of it? And this part sometimes feels like a negotiation, like trying to decide and get to a similar place. But it's just so critical and prevents misunderstandings. It's like we need to talk about, what does this mean to you? What does it mean to me? And intention follows attention. When we're really intentional about what we do, then we can know where to put the attention, how to move through this intimate experience.
Yeah, I think the meaning is one of my favorite categories because it gives you a chance to say, oh, I'm in for that or I'm not. I actually don't think you have to get to the same place in that someone might be like, I am like really ready for a relationship. I think you have possibilities. I would really love to explore the possibility of a long-term commitment. And I might be like, oh, I'm actually just getting out of a divorce and I'm not available for that. So what the result would be is, you know what? It doesn't make sense for us to even play because we're too far apart in this area.
Right.
At least we know that instead of trying to come together.
Well, yeah, you would only if you can come together would you move forward. And then A stands for aftercare. Yeah, which I definitely can see why you added that.
Yes. And so I realized that Tracy Nojak's framework doesn't include it, but I learned it in ISTA as well. And the aftercare is, what do we need after the experience of intimacy? So for me, oftentimes, as an example, is that let me just state this never has to be the same. I'm not every example. I'm like, oh, I just want you to text me the next day, then that's fine, right? Like it can change with every single interaction, but do you want to text the next day? Do you want a phone call? Do you want a phone call 3 days later? Do you want
to never talk again?
Especially if I'm at a retreat with someone and I know I'm going to see them again. One of the things that I often say is like, I just want to make sure that the next time I see you, we can give each other a hug and a smile, right? Like that's the feeling. And I want to be able to do that every time I see you.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Or how am I going to feel that like this experience, which was like really beautiful and nourishing, like how am I going to feel like it's continuing? Even if it's just to say like, thank you for that experience. We're not continuing, right? But just like there might be some closure feels really good.
Or even discussing the experience. How did that go for you? How was it for me? Which may seem pretty vulnerable, but how great is it to really talk through and externally process a sexual experience?
Right. And what's making me laugh when you say that, like, yes, it might be really vulnerable to talk about the fact that you just did something really vulnerable, which has sex.
The sex is actually the most vulnerable thing, but talking about it feels even scarier.
Okay. So that's a really high level, quick overview of this entire conversation. So before we do a role play, I just want to express some of my experiences with it.
Sure.
and I've mentioned my fairy dust lover that I have at the moment. So he and I went out on a date in January. I hadn't seen him in 30 years. And
30 years.
And we had this lovely conversation. I was definitely like, oh, like there's a spark here. This is fun. I want to see him again. And I was like, oh, but I want to have this conversation. So I said at the end of the first date, once it was clear to me that I wanted to go on a second date, I said, hey, I'd love to see you again. And I'd love to have this conversation, which I knew he was not familiar with. And he was like, okay, I'm in. I'm really curious and I'm in. So on our second date, we ended up spending 2 hours having this conversation. And what I said to him also at the beginning, I said, I just want you to know I want to have this conversation and sex isn't on the table tonight because I want us to really digest this conversation. And partly it was because I knew where I was coming from and I had no idea how that was going to be received. In that I was just in the middle of my divorce. I had just started new work in the Tantra field, that I was really over and needing a break from processing relationships, and that I was, polyamorous, and that I really was looking for someone to have an interaction with in real life, but I really wasn't available for conversations and texting and phone calls in between. Like I was just in my headspace of where I was at. So I knew that those were all pretty edgy things in general. For me, I was like, oh, I'm showing up and this is how I'm showing up. And I don't know how I'm going to be received. So I wanted to give him the chance to digest everything I had to say so that if we were going to move forward in whatever way, that both of us felt like
Beautiful.
we're in that space. And then of course, I didn't really know much about him. So that conversation, it was so beautiful. And at the end of it, I remember him saying, he's like, I feel like we just went on 30 dates.
Interesting.
And we got to talk through, like, in all honesty, like he is monogamous typically. And, and he really loves to like dive in deep in with someone into a relationship and is very likes to talk every day. And so we did have some differences that we were both like, okay, these differences are here and we were willing to meet each other and to explore it. And then also stay in open communication about if it stopped working for one of us.
That's so great.
So that's one experience that I've had. Did you want to, I have another one, but you've had one too, right?
Yes, I have had one. And, I suggested it to someone who I hadn't met in person yet, but we were anticipating a visit and had spent a lot of time together on Zoom. And I said, look, this is a conversation I'd love to have with you because I am coming to see you. And I wonder if you're open to it. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And we went through it and, only spent like an hour talking about it. But basically the thing he said back to me was like, I feel deeply respected, which is just, lovely. That was the biggest response I remember him saying. He's just like, there's so much intention here. And yeah, it felt really good to have the conversation.
Beautiful. And I'll also speak to this part of it then for myself. And the phrasing of there is freedom in boundaries, which is that what I noticed after having these conversations, and I've had this conversation many times now, is I always felt more relaxed.
Yes, you've said that to me, like that it's just so important to you because of that relaxation point.
Yes. And so remember my pleasure pillars.
Yeah.
One of them is a relaxed nervous system. The other one is trust. And this conversation just does so much for me in establishing trust and relaxed nervous system that I now understand that it's fundamental for me in terms of being able to move forward with someone.
It's like you said, 30 dates.
30, yeah. And I was like,
because usually these things just trickle out over time.
Or they trickle out in the moment. And for me, yeah, like there's like, oh, like I just know that in the moment makes me stressed. And if I'm stressed or anxious in the moment, then now I know that my pleasure is not going to be able to be online. So I'm actually like trying to get ahead of, it's like it's proactive pleasure.
Proactive pleasure. A new term, new phrase.
Yes. And then I guess the other ways to have it is that I have also had this conversation with people, in a 15-minute conversation we both knew how this operates, right? Like we know how
you're familiar with the conversation.
we're familiar with the framework.
And you're familiar with each other perhaps as well in the context.
Yep.
So it can be faster or slow.
Right. In this case, these are more, is like a friends with benefits type of thing where like, oh, like this is a sexy night that could happen. Let's just have this conversation. Okay. So we're on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. So how are you going to do this role play?
So we're going to do it where I like to do RRBB. So like I'll start and then you'll start. And we're going to do it as like in real life, like not, so we're saying like we're intimate friends, but we're not setting up a date. We're not doing anything. We're just having this conversation. So starting our relationship. I am single. I consider myself solo poly, which means that I put myself first in a relationship. So there's no one that I'm checking in with. If we were to have an experience together that like I'm only reporting to myself in this moment in time. I don't have any other partners that I'm reporting to, although I do have another lover. And at the moment, I actually feel really full and fulfilled in my life. And I'm not looking for a long-term intimate partner, but I am open to like, seeing where things go. But at this moment in time, I feel like the relationship that I'm in right now I feel pretty content not being, in another relationship.
Okay. So I am married. So I have a husband. So I am in that long-term committed relationship. I just broke up with my boyfriend. So I am post breakup. So I only have one lover right now, but I would say I am in a post relationship place where I am trying to come back to myself. So I'm also not interested in anything serious, but I'm interested in playing and seeing what chemistry occurs. And I'm curious, but not, and I don't have to report to anyone except for my husband. And we are in an open relationship. We're polyamorous. So he's aware of me being with other people.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. Okay, boundaries. So I'll go next. So in this moment, my boundaries are that I would ask that you only interact with me from a place of fuck yes. My boundary is that I will only interact with you from a place of fuck yes. From a physical boundary of if we're going to interact right now, I would like to keep my pants on. And I'm trying to think. I'm taking a moment. I'm like actually intentionally pausing, bringing hearts to see if there's any other physical boundaries that I have at the moment. And I think I'll just name that if a sleepover happens, I am comfortable with us sleeping naked, even if we're, there's no playing involved.
Okay. I think that's a good description. Thank you for sharing your boundaries. What are my boundaries? I just want to make out. I do not. And I would be loved to be naked, but I do not want to do anything else. I want to be held. I want to be touched, but I'm not interested in penetration or oral sex. It's not what I want to do right now. It's not what I'm longing for. I'm not staying over. Yeah, I think that's it.
So what I'm hearing are your boundaries are anything beyond making out, and your boundaries you're not staying over, and you're keeping your clothes on.
No, we can be naked.
Oh no, sorry. You could. Yeah, we can be naked. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's all I have. I'm just interested in one-on-one too. I'm not interested in other people.
Yeah. So if someone happens to walk in,
if you're at a party or if you're in a group gathering, I just want one-on-one connection. And I think, well, maybe this gets into desires, so I'll stop there.
So what are my desires? I desire like deep intimacy, and that can come through conversation, through eye gazing, through presence, through touch and being held, like whether through hand holding or just like resting our arms next to each other. I also love to have my fingers run through my hair. And so my desire is at the end of this experience is that we feel more connected. I'm not so concerned about the sexual aspect of it. Making out also feels lovely, but I do desire to feel, more connected to you at the end of this from an emotional level.
Yeah. So I feel the same way. That was part of my desires, that I want to talk. I want to eye gaze. I want to touch. I want to feel soulfully connected along with the physical. I'm not interested in the physical without the emotional and human.
Yeah.
Like I just want to be seen as a human and that we are connecting.
may I come back to my desire for a second?
Mm-hmm.
I think a way that I would say that is that I'm not interested. So back to this would actually go back to a boundary. I'm not interested in a transactional experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in one that's more based on emotional, intimate connection.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, I want to be crushed.
Brave hearts. The definition of crushed is
Just like being compressed, like putting weight against me and putting weight on me. And then, obviously with watching my face to see when I'm like, okay, enough.
okay. Yes. Well, okay.
I don't have a particular safe word, but I'll give you one.
And since I'm twice the size of you, I could put all of my weight on top of you and just look at you until you say done. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
S for sexual health. So the last time I get tested pretty much every 3 months. And the last time I got tested, everything was clear. And I have had 3 partners that involve penetration since then, but all with protection. And I've done no other high risk behavior since then. And I'm in menopause, not able to get pregnant.
That's very lucky for you. Yeah. So I am probably tested once a year or upon request.
Did I tell you the last time I got tested was also a month ago?
Oh, okay.
I don't think I said that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But every 3 months it's, and so last time I got tested, I was clean. So I'm fine. I have an IUD, so I'm protected against pregnancy. I've had 2 partners in the last 12 months, and they are clean, and they're both clean.
Clear, I think.
Clear. Yeah, it's not clean, because if you're clean, then that means sex is dirty.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, and they're both clear and are tested regularly.
And do you want to name this at some, you were fluid bonded, right?
What does that mean?
With this, so that that the people you are having who, if you're not using protection with.
Correct. I'm having unprotected sex with 2 different people, and they both know that.
Yep.
And so.
And then they've gotten tested, and then they're having, if they're having unprotected sex, they're having unprotected with someone who's tested, and then no one else, they're not having sex with anyone else without protection. Unless they tell the group. That's what fluid bonded means, is that there's a limited number of people who have gotten tested who are then having unprotected sex.
That's true.
And then if if a new person is coming into the equation, it's protected until, if it's not, then everyone else gets tested again.
Yeah, makes sense. Right. So maybe it's important to say how many people. So there are really 4 people in this fluid bonding, and any one additional protection is used.
Yes.
Unless they are tested. And
right.
We're all in communication about that.
Yes.
Pretty important. Meaning, what do you want this to mean?
What I wanted it to mean is the deepening of our already very deep relationship, that it's nourishing and that it's fulfilling for me, that it's something that's enhancing, right? It's either adding play, silliness, fun,
growth,
deepening, all of that, without expectation that it's going to happen again, when it's going to happen again. That, there's certainly meaning of I'm available to process and talk about it, but that it's really in our relationship of blurred boundaries, that it's this moment is occurring because it feels really alive for both of us.
Which is the fuck yes. Yeah. And I've really just wrapped it up. I mean, that's what I feel the meaning is too. I'm wondering if there's anything else I would add to that, because I feel the same. I think I'm open to it meaning a lot, and a lot of growth and a lot of introspection and seeing each other and deepening our friendship. And I'm open to it meaning nothing, which is really interesting to be at both ends of the spectrum are okay.
Yes.
It can just be play, or it can be oh, wow, that was so juicy and so interesting, and I see you in a different light now. Or, there could be that, or it just could be oh, that was so fun and nothing.
And I guess the meaning in that, I would say, is that it's something that can enhance, I would like it to enhance or keep neutral.
Yeah.
Our relationship.
But obviously not.
Did not detract from what we already have.
Right. And the aftercare. Let's talk about we tell each other that we love. I say I love you to you. And that would be a lovely thing to hear afterward. And that's what I want.
Okay. So I'm here. You wanted me to tell you that I love you, which I do. Yeah, I would love to check in the next day. It can be on Vox as usual, but just that it's intentional of like, hey, let's just talk about this. How are you feeling this morning?
How are you processing this?
Yep.
How's it feeling post? Yeah. What do you need? How can I help you? Just offering each other those reflections and questions.
Yes.
That sounds great. This is a lovely little hypothetical role playing. So, Bravehearts, would you have the RBDSM conversation with a potential lover or boyfriend?
Or girlfriend or partner or fling
or husband or wife or...
Yes. In fact, thank you, Andrea, for bringing that up, is that this conversation does not have to be with a stranger.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be the new person.
Partner, right? It can actually be with your current person or people that, you can like bring this in anytime and you can bring it in frequently. It doesn't mean that you've had it once, you never have it again. Everything changes. And so yes, having this conversation frequently is, again, it gives you the opportunity to know more about each other and deepen connection.
So we dare you, Bravehearts, to have it. Think about it. What would stop you? What scares you? What excites you? And go for it. Thank you for listening to these. We love you. We do love you. These edgy conversations. Here's our aftercare. We love you. We're giving you a big hug. Do you need permission to be human? You got it.
Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.